bit like everyone's just kind of squaring off in the market right now, doesn't it?
Yeah, like a big standoff.
Nobody wants to make the first move. Everyone's waiting to see what the other guy's going to do, especially with currencies, right?
It's all about anticipation in the currency markets right now, that's for sure.
It's like they're all holding their breath.
You see these major pairs, your USD, USDJPY.
Right.
They're locked in these tight ranges, barely budging. And this is even after all the recent economic data releases.
Yeah, you figure those would shake things up a bit. US PPI, CPI, jobless claims. I mean, those are big deals, right?
They are, but it's like these currencies are, I don't know, playing a high-stakes poker game or something.
Yeah, just waiting to see who's going to blink first. So how do we even begin to read the tea leaves here?
Yeah.
What's the takeaway for someone like me who's, trying to follow along at home?
Well, the thing about these stalemates is that they usually mean that a big move is brewing.
Okay, but which direction?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right now, the markets are trying to digest all this economic data, and until there's some kind of consensus, it's anyone's guess which way things will go.
So it really could go either way.
It really could, yeah. And that's what makes it so interesting to watch.
And a little nerve-wracking, maybe?
Maybe a little bit.
Especially when you see something like the EURUSD doing this whole dance around that 100-day moving average.
Oh, yeah. That's a key level to watch right now, for sure, that 100-day moving average.
What does that even mean, though? Explain it like I'm,
Sure. So basically, it's like a technical indicator. Traders use it to try to get a sense of where the market might be headed.
Okay.
So right now, that EURUSD pair, it's like it's walking a tightrope along that 100-day moving average. If it breaks through decisively, one way or the other, that could signal a big shift in sentiment.
And then everybody jumps on board, right? Like a domino effect.
Exactly. We could see a much larger trend emerge.
Yeah.
But if it bounces back, stays within that range.
Then we're stuck in limbo a while longer.
Exactly. Could be stuck in this holding pattern. So yeah, keep your eye on that 100-day moving average for sure.
All right, so eyes glued to the charts. Speaking of indicators, though, what about US Treasury yields? Those haven't exactly been subtle lately.
No, they haven't. We've seen long-dated Treasury yields creeping upwards recently.
Which means?
Well, it usually means investors are starting to price in higher inflation down the line. When those long-term bond yields rise, like we've been seeing, it often suggests that they're thinking, inflation might be back on the menu.
So even though we've had some recent data suggesting that inflation might be cooling off a bit.
Yeah, like that recent wholesale inflation data.
The market's not convinced it's a lasting trend yet.
Right. The market's a forward-looking beast. It doesn't just react to what's happening right now. It tries to anticipate what's going to happen down the road.
So are they seeing something we're not, or are they just being paranoid?
It's tough to say for sure. It's possible that this recent dip in inflation is temporary. Maybe it's just a blip on the radar, and we'll be back to those higher numbers before we know it. Or maybe it's the start of a more sustained trend. Investors are hedging their bets just in case. That uncertainty, that's what's driving the yields higher.
It's wild how much psychology plays into all of this, It's not always just about the raw numbers. It's about what those numbers make people think and how they react to them.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it.
It's like a giant game of chicken, except instead of cars, it's trillions of dollars.
And nobody wants to be the first one to swerve.
It's like trying to predict the weather in the middle of a hurricane, isn't it? You've got all the data in the world, but who knows what'll actually happen?
And some markets are stormier than others.
Speaking of stormy, how about Tesla? All that hype for the big Robotaxi reveal.
You'd think Wall Street would be doing the robot dance, but,
More like a disappointed sigh, really.
yeah.
Yeah, why do you think investors weren't exactly over the moon? I mean, they showcased some cool tech, right?
Well, sure, the tech is impressive, no doubt. But there's a difference between, hey, look at this cool thing, and here's how this cool thing makes us money.
Yeah, so it's one thing to have a self-driving car. It's another to actually turn it into a business.
Exactly. And I think investors were hoping for a bit more meat on the bone, so to speak.
What were they missing then? What kind of specifics would have gotten them excited?
Well, for starters, how much is it going to cost to mass produce these robotaxis? What are they going to charge people to ride in them?
Right, the nitty-gritty details.
Exactly. And then there's the whole regulatory nightmare. When can they realistically get these things on the road without, running into a wall of red tape?
Which, knowing how these things go, could be a while.
Could be a while, yeah. So investors, they're looking at all this and they're like, okay, cool tech, but where's the profit margin? Where's the timeline? Show me the money.
And Tesla didn't really deliver on those points?
Not this time, no. at least not to the extent that investors were hoping for.
Which is a bit of a shame because the technology itself is pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It is. But investors got to look at the bottom line. Speaking of high-tech bets, though, how about that whole hyper-Bitcoinization idea?
Oh yeah, that's been popping up everywhere since Bitcoin Amsterdam.
Right. Everyone's suddenly talking about it.
So is it actually possible, or are we still in the realm of science fiction?
I mean, it's a bold vision, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just talking about Bitcoin going up in value here. We're talking about it replacing, well, everything.
As in, no more dollars, no more euros, no more yen, just Bitcoin.
That's the idea, yeah. Whether it's actually feasible on a global scale is, well, that's a whole other conversation.
All right, well, let's have that conversation then. Break it down for me. What would need to happen for this hyper-Bitcoinization thing to actually work?
Well, for starters, you'd need practically everyone on board. And I mean everyone. Individuals, sure, but also governments, institutions.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
It would be a complete overhaul of how we think about and use money. A complete and total paradigm shift.
So probably not something we need to worry about next week then.
Probably not, no. But the fact that it's even being discussed seriously, in financial circles, at conferences, it just goes to show how far Bitcoin has come.
It's come a long way from those early days when people were like, Bitcoin? What's that? Is that like digital monopoly money or something?
Right, now you've got major companies, even countries, adding it to their balance sheets.
So hyper-Bitcoinization, maybe not tomorrow, but...
But the seeds are being sown, yeah.
Interesting. Now, while we're on the topic of Bitcoin, there's another trend I've been hearing more about, this whole underground crypto thing. What's the deal there?
Ah, yes. The rise of what's called the non-KYC exchanges.
Non-KYC. That's a new one on me. What's that all about?
So, KYC, that stands for Know Your Customer. It's basically a set of rules and regulations that financial institutions have to follow to verify the identity of their clients.
Which makes sense, right? Prevents money laundering and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But these non-KYC exchanges, they're like the Wild West of crypto. You don't need to prove who you are to trade there. You can stay completely anonymous.
Which I imagine is pretty appealing to certain people.
Oh, absolutely. For privacy advocates, it's a dream come true.
But there's always a flip side, right?
Always a trade-off. And in this case, the lack of oversight is a major concern. It makes these platforms attractive for all sorts of shady activities, unfortunately.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, this anonymity thing.
It is. It's all about balancing those competing interests.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy versus security, freedom versus accountability.
Tough questions with no easy answers. Speaking of tough questions, let's bring things back down to earth for a minute and talk about something that probably hits a little closer to home for a lot of people. Family finances. Family and finances. It's like mixing oil and water sometimes, isn't it?
It can be a recipe for disaster, that's for sure.
You've got all these emotions and history and expectations all tied up in something as charged as money.
And the stakes are so high, It's not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about family relationships, trust.
It can make those awkward Thanksgiving dinners even more. Interesting. We actually came across a story this week that really highlights this potential for things to go sideways. It involved a mother-in-law, a power of attorney, and a missing emergency fund.
Oh, boy. Yeah, those power of attorney situations can get really messy really fast.
In this case, $25,000 just vanished. Poof.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, it caused quite a rift in the family.
I bet.
So this might be a tough question, but how can families avoid these kinds of situations? What are the lessons here?
Well, I think the biggest thing is communication. Clear, open, honest communication.
Easier said than done sometimes, especially when it's family.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's crucial. You have to be able to talk about money openly and honestly, even if it's uncomfortable, and, set those boundaries.
Boundary.
Yeah, like what are you willing to help with financially? What are your limits? What are you absolutely not willing to compromise on?
So that everyone's on the same page from the get-go.
Exactly. And sometimes it might even be worth it to get everything in writing.
Like a prenup, but for your parents.
Well, not exactly, but maybe have some kind of formal agreement, especially if you're talking about large sums of money or power of attorney.
So get a lawyer involved just to be safe.
Exactly. It might seem like overkill, but it can save a lot of heartache down the road.
Solid advice. All right, moving from family dramas to, well, more dramas, I guess. We can't wrap things up without mentioning this whole Boeing situation.
Oh, yeah. The standoff with the machinists union, that's a big one.
It feels like they've been at it forever. What's the latest there?
Well, it's still a stalemate, unfortunately. The union rejected Boeing's latest offer, so the strike continues.
And what are the sticking points? Why can't they seem to reach an agreement?
It really boils down to the usual suspects: wages, benefits, working
The
conditions.
bread and butter of labor disputes.
Exactly. The machinists, they want higher pay raises, better health care, and more protections against what they see as unfair labor practices.
And Boeing saying,
Well, they're arguing that their offer is fair, that it's in line with industry standards, and that they need to keep costs down to stay competitive.
which, knowing how cutthroat the aerospace industry is, I can kind of see their point.
Right. But on the other hand, the machinists are saying, hey, we're the ones building these planes. We deserve our fair share.
It's that age-old struggle, isn't it? Labor versus capital.
It's a classic story for a reason. It's a dynamic that plays out in every industry, every economy, all over the world.
And it makes you realize that no matter how much technology advances, how interconnected the world becomes, these fundamental economic forces are always going to be at play.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that the human element, it never really goes away.
No matter how hard we try to automate it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this deep dive. From jittery currencies to robotaxi dreams, underground crypto to family financial feuds, and of course the ever-present tension between labor and capital, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. And I think it just goes to show how complex and interconnected this world really is.
It can feel overwhelming sometimes, all this information, all these different forces pulling us in different directions. But that's why we do what we do, to try to make sense of it all, one deep dive at a time.
One piece of the puzzle at a time.
Exactly. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, keep asking those tough questions. This is The Deep Dive. Signing off.